Blog Talk Radio.
Live from the nation's capital, it's Quintessential Listening, Poetry, with host Dr. Michael Anthony Ingram.
Program. My name is Michael Anthony Ingram. I'm here with Sara, Cahill, Marron. Sara, are you with me?
I'm here.
Fantastic. So great to talk to you tonight. Let's start off with a question. What is poetry?
That is the question. Question of all questions. Gosh. Start off with a doozy. Okay. Poetry, I guess to me, I can only answer what poetry is to me.
Yes.
To me, poetry is like an assembly language. I think it has changed for me over time, definitely. But right now, assembly language is what programmers use to write code. And so it's like Fortran, C++, Perl. I don't know if you're familiar with any of those, but those are all just different ways of expressing the same idea. And they all perform different needs. So they look like English, but they're just this scaffolding that's standing on top of binary. So there are these endless combinations of ones and zeros. And I think of that binary as sort of like the biology that we're all comprised of, these basic bits, so we all have bodies and minds. We're all made up of these same substances like chemicals and neurons, and that's the zeros and ones that we're built up on. And it's infinitely complex, but in everyday life, that's almost impossible to communicate, or maybe it's not impossible, but it's sometimes boring or too complicated or not relevant. So enter poetry or the poem. It collects the amalgamations of feelings and all these disparate emotions and experiences into something that's translatable. So I'm thinking a lot of my poetry has to do with this digitization of language. So I think a lot about this coding parallel in everyday life. So to me, that's sort of what poetry is. It's this translation of what is a simple relation that we have to one another into something larger and translatable, a way we can communicate.
All right, very nice. Why is it important?
Because we're more alike than we are different, I think. So poetry becomes that connective tissue. So sticking with my computer metaphor here, I guess, it's not just the sinew and bones in your body, but it's also like the electricity and the wires that allow us to communicate with one another, send messages. It's the beautiful things too, right? It's like the curve of the horizon of a bridge, or the crescendo in a symphony, or something like whatever you think is inspiring in the world. What I'm thinking of is Whitman's first line in Leaves of Grass. One of my all-time favorite poems. It's one of the only poems I think I know from memory. That I celebrate myself and sing myself, and what I assume you shall assume. For every atom belonging to me as good belongs to you. And to me, that's like both of your questions sort of captures what poetry is and why it's important. I think that we all have so many different things going on in everyday life, and it already is such a barrier to communicate just via language and how we're brought up in our different experiences, that if you have something like art that you can feel and experience, then you have like an iota more of a chance of connecting and feeling more in tune with your fellow human.
All right. Share a piece of your work.
I think the first one that I'd like to share is a piece called Sacramento, California, number 7. And this has both of these ideas that I was just talking about, both of the digitization and connection to humanity. So it's in the format of an email. Can't quite see this over the radio, but I'll read it. Starts winwinwinston@gmail.com. To me, Thursday, December 14th, 2018, 12:46 a.m., 46 minutes ago. Job application. Dear hiring manager, I am hoping that the waitressing job at this Denny's is still available, as I am still available and desperately in need of money and the exchange of bodily labor for money so that I may buy food and a place to sleep, because so far I have been sleeping in a hotel room that smells like dried hay and black beans, and more than anything else, I would love to bring pancakes to your customers and to refill the syrup bottles. And I would especially like to note that I wouldn't mind cleaning them. And in fact, I noticed that they're dirty, and I would make that my first task, to clean the syrup from the outside of their bottles, if I should be selected for the open position. All this is to say that I thank you for considering me for the position and hope to hear from you soon. I do not have a resume or other employment references to speak of, but if you want, you can call Sandy, 571-639-689. She is my case manager, and she says I've been doing real good. And I'm sure she'll give me a review so I can be in the running. In gratitude and in hope that you will call me soon so I no longer have to send these emails from the library, I would greatly appreciate it. Winston. That's the end.
I can see that. I can feel that. You know, we have a caller. I'd like to bring this person on if that's okay. They've got a question for you. All right?
Sure.
All right. Area code 202-339. You're on the air. You have a question for Sara. Well, maybe this person just wants to listen. It's very nice. They just want
maybe
to listen.
Maybe they'll build up having questions.
They're still formulating their question. They're formulating. What sparked your initial love of poetry?
That's a good question too. In school, I always really liked to write, and I was praised for it. I remember when I was really young, I always got good grades, and when we had to write the 5-paragraph essays in school, I'd get really high marks, and teachers would tell me things like, you should be a speechwriter when you grow up, or whatever, things like that. But I never remember really loving poetry as a kid, but then I moved to New York in January of 2010, and I was like barely 20 years old, and this is a very non-unique story and situation, but like so many other kids that did that, I found the beat poets, like Kerouac, Ginsberg. I just connected to what both of those poets and all of the others, modernists and futurists from like the 20s to the 60s, wrote about being scruffy and young and gay and industrial in New York, smoking too many cigarettes, riding the trains, searching for that inner flame and moving about, and I think that's when I really started to write poetry, and it was terrible. I wrote really bad poems back then.
Mm-hmm.
But
I understand
I
that.
also remember Yeah. I read Leaves of Grass for the first time back then, and I read Howl by Ginsberg for the first time. I took a class on the Romantic poets in college, and so I was introduced to Blake and Wordsworth and Coleridge and Byron, and all of those poets were at that time too. You know, like when you're young like that, it felt life changing. So poetry came to me at a time when I was ready for it, and I was ready to receive it too. And I remember, and New York too is a very special place to be prompted. I think there's plenty of inspiration to be found there. So I have plenty of mentors as well. I think I may have a poem about this.
All right.
I had this mentorship with a poet. Let me find it on my computer while I'm telling the story. Those two books that I just mentioned, how my first copy of Howl and Leaves of Grass, evoked a friendship with a poet named Morty Scalar. He has since passed, and we met sort of in a very New York way on the train. Here it is. I'll read this poem. And I was a stranger to him, but he was sitting next to me, and I had these two books in my lap, and he sort of like tapped me on the shoulder and asked if I was a poet, and I said yes. And I guess maybe that was the first time I ever said yes, I was a poet. I think I was not at the moment, but I adopted the role, and we started emailing, and he offered to workshop my poetry, and he did, and he was very, very polite. You know, looking back on it now, almost a decade later, and reading some of the emails, after I found out he had died this past year, I went through my email, pulled all of the emails that we had exchanged together, and this will take me some time, but I'm putting them into a manuscript so that I have the idea of sort of like Rilke's letters to a young poet, and I'm reformatting them so that it's not boring. You know, it's not just emails back and forth, but they'll become poems. And the vision for the work is that, you know, an older poet is mentoring a younger poet. And
yes.
Anyway, I can read one of the first poems that I've gotten.
I'd like that very much. Can you? Yes, please.
Okay. It's also an email format. I'm very into this format. To M. Scalar, from SCM, 8000 Utopia Parkway, Queens, March 2011. F-train poets, we identify one another by the beat-up copies held in laps. Sway, sway, shoulders touching, decades between us. My stolen Leaves of Grass and the seminal howl heard through your Walkman headphones. And selfishly, like a real young poet, I tell you I'm listening to recordings of myself. And wisely, like the teacher you are, you say you're interested. And isn't poetry great? And why don't we share a slice of chocolate cake and talk about it all? The end.
So, how does a poem begin for you? Is it with an idea, a form, or an image, or all three?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think sort of like the last two that I've read have been almost character sketches, like the Winston poem and then this Morty poem. So usually poems are evoked for me from conversations or by phrasal conversations, little things that I hear on the street. So I suppose those are images, right? But they're snippets. I was walking recently on East Street once. East Street is where I work down in Judiciary, and some artist had put up on the street corner a poster that said, "Be careful what you say, I might just quote you." And I laughed because that's kind of how my poetry arises. Is I move through the world, and when I hear something, it doesn't become a poem, but it usually triggers something in my mind, connects to a color or changing leaves or something. And I think the way that my thoughts move about are like puzzle pieces, and that's how a poem will begin. It's like a light switch is flipped on, and then the composing can start. And I think of the composition more like composing music in that way. So there's one note, and as soon as I hear the note, then a melody is usually evoked. But it's many things. I have this document in my Google Docs, one for each year, and when I hear something, and I usually will open that and draft something in, and then I go back and will edit periodically or pull things out that have any merit whatsoever. And there's a lot of crap in there, but that's just the editing process, and my writing process in general is constant revision and constant editing. Yeah.
All right. As you think about your body of work, what are some of the predominant themes?
Human suffering. Is that too
Okay.
dark?
No.
I don't think of it as dark.
We accept everything on Quintessential Listening, so go.
Yeah.
Human suffering,
I mean,
hey, that's just another day in the neighborhood. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, here, I just picked up my book, Reasons for the Long Tomb, and here's a perfect poem that illustrates what I mean. So, human suffering, yes, but not in a dark way. Beautiful, but heart-wrenching. I think, like, going back to how I answered your question about what is poetry, I think that people's, well, let me just read this, and then maybe I can comment some more about it. This is so my first book is called Reasons for the Long Tomb, and it came out last year. This is from the first chapter. It's poem number 6. Ain't never seen a city like this. Chicago's stranger, but this is something to be black and female, I think. Sitting next to the large woman on a free bus to a 50-cent train, we talk in color, not skin. Of New York and of the Twin Cities. Ain't never seen killing like this, says stranger from Detroit, walking his bike up, down Nicollet Mall with me. Mississippi, strange fruit, Miss Ella's mournful kind. That Southern Gothic, strung up straight from St. Anthony's Water Power Stone Bridge. Shadows swinging, an old blues breeze singing. Amar's radio waves, wafted from the teal bike he's pushing. Portable device wailing, white girl walking. People just need to learn to stay in their lane. Laughing like Carrie Mae Weems screams or Pope L reading the Wall Street Journal. My friend says that we will always be separate, not equal. I want to marry a black body, thinks I. Blinks, bloody tears, back for Jones on the radio. Steady streams of murder, marooting mother Sam Adams full of hops of bubbly red enough cheeks to blue through news. Channels in search of EZ, X, Asis, see? Minneapolis inside of me. Ain't never seen calamity like this, but it's not so bad. The internet's only 15. And without speaking, one may order flights, food, cars, women. And learning is not as important as educating. Ain't never seen a city like this. You're the all-American white woman. No matter how far we both go, at the top, you'll always win. Unless there's a white man, then we're both fucked. That's the end of that one.
Right. Tell me how it relates.
There's a couple of like really kind of buried artistic references in there, like Carrie Mae Weems' Scream and Pope L reading the Wall Street Journal. Pope L he's an African-American performance artist, and that piece, I feel like it's relevant to explain here. He eats the Wall Street Journal and then excretes it in the piece. And Carrie Mae Weems' Screams is her screaming in a television piece. And then Miss Ella's mournful, it's Ella Fitzgerald singing Strange Fruit. And this story in this poem is about, this happened. This was the conversation I walked with a black man in Minneapolis, and he said that to me, and at the moment it was funny. He laughed. Unless there's a white man at the top, then we're both fucked. Excuse my language. I don't know if I can curse on here.
That's okay.
That was in the poem though. But it was at the time. I remember walking back to my hotel. I was there for this romanticism conference. I was presenting a paper on Blake, and I had a nice hotel room, and this was at the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement. There was a lot of people dying on TV, and it was just a moment that I felt. I have my own story, and
yes,
and this man has his own story, and we encountered each other for a very brief moment, and so I wanted to write something that captured how intense everyone's lives are, and how brief, if we don't truly give each other the love, or I guess the acknowledgement that we're all sort of going through a similar version of suffering, and it may not look the same on everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you can pay attention to someone else in a way that matters, I suppose.
Wow, it reminds me of the whole concept of empathy for another person. We all have different lived experiences, but empathy can bring us together just in terms of understanding another person's story. You may not understand the story itself, but you can resonate with the feelings that go along with the story. And that's real important. That's real important. It's real important. Well, let's take a brief break, and we'll be right back. Hello, everyone. This is Michael Anthony Ingram. I'm here with Sara Cahill Marron. Sara, do you have another poem for us?
Yes, I do. Let's do a short one. This is called Albatross Number 3. Riding the elevator to the 32nd floor of this glass castle, cradling 2 boxed bouquets sent before I crushed you. And now the ladies fawn, how beautiful, tightening their cheeks into office smiles. And I want to shove the flowers into their hearts, because holding on to something you've let go of burns. And
all great writers have great writing influences. Who are some of yours, and what makes them great in your eyes?
I think I've mentioned a few already. Blake, Ginsberg, Whitman, and Rilke. Rilke is particularly poignant for me this year. I'm reading a poem a day. I have this 365 days of Rilke book, and I do a writing exercise every morning. And so I'm starting my day with a Rilke poem every single day. But those Ginsberg, Whitman, and Blake were the foundation for my poetry. But I think that there are other artists too that have, shaped who I am as a poet. And some of those people, Marcel Duchamp, would be remiss not to mention. One of his paintings is on the cover of my first book. He's a modernist artist from the turn of the 20th century. I love Adrienne Piper. She's also a performance artist. Mina Loy, futurist poet from the same era. And W.C. Williams was also one of my favorites. I wasn't a huge T.S. Eliot fan, but Williams was more my jam. I think all of those, I realize I'm mentioning a lot of men, but I think that collection of people at that time period had a style of writing that was very, they were all writing like manifestos of sorts, and it was after World War I, and some of them were after World War I. It was that period of the 20s, 30s, and then the Ginsbergs and beat poets were right after World War II, 50s, 60s, and so each of them had this style of like recreation. There's an essay that I love particularly where it's Freud talking about beauty, but it was after a conversation he had with Rilke, and he is struggling with the concept of destruction and how to live after a war like World War I. And I know that our world now is, we have not had destruction like that, but I think that those artists really move me because they, as we've been discussing, the idea of empathy and recreating your world or seeing beauty in destruction or beauty where there is despair is, to me, it's just a very common and relatable feeling, and I think that that's universal and kind of timeless. So I just love them all for that.
One thing that I've noticed about your work in terms of your poetry, in terms of the titles, they are amazingly detailed in terms of the titles. What role should a title play for a poem?
That's a good question. They didn't used to be like that. I think some of these newer ones are changing. Thanks for noticing. I have a friend. I'll mention her by name, Allison Palmer. She's a good friend of mine. We've known each other 8 or 9 years now. A good poet friend, and I used to make fun of her titles because they sound like mine do now. I think you're meant. I'll read a long titled poem next after I finish this thought, but I used to specifically keep them short because I remember thinking that the titles got in the way of the words to come. But your point is making me now reflect on myself as an artist. I think there's no stagnation anywhere. So the long titles now are sort of fun because it's like an intro. It's an intro to the poem.
Well, for beginning writers, what's important to consider when titling a poem? What's important to consider?
Wow, that's an interesting thought. It should not be too generic. I mean, that's a must. I know when I'm workshopping poems for new or developing writers, when you have a title, I can't think of an example. Hold on. It's what really I see a lot in writers who are just starting out or people who are just like trying their hand at poetry is very non-specific language. And here's a suggestion I got from my friend Morty, who I'm creating this manuscript for. And it's not new information. This is a W.C. Williams quote, actually. Be specific. It comes straight from Spring and All, one of my favorite books. Be specific. When you're titling, when you're writing poems, be specific about everything. So that would be my advice about titling, too. It's like, don't just say the spring day or something. Be very specific. As much as we all I've been droning on about relations and how similar we all are, like we don't want to be bored, like everyone is reading or engaging with the world or waking up because it's a new day. So I don't know. Be specific.
Be specific. We'll share another piece with an amazingly titled poem.
Okay. My mountains could care less about you. That's the title.
All right.
My mountains could care less about you. feel structures clinging, tendrils rising, curling fingers, desperate, lonely, clutching, dry and desolate. You've buried basements and pools, trying, like only the hairless do, to stay cool, as if the heat is a thing you can hide from. There's no road between my breasts. Tremble at the sight, at the tracing of lines, at the endless rising, billowing, blossoming hills, blanketed Madrian sky islands, tectonic, tumbling seams of the Sierra Madre, pine oaks peeking out, ancient and alpine, mountain islands, my desert sea. My arid desert to grassland, cradles, peaks you've named with your expiring words. Huachaca, Peñaleño, Santa Catalina, cashed red spills of mercury, tinted dirt, hemmed edges of tan, yellow, gray, 13 square patches of green, choking on dust. From 34,000 feet, think of me as a woman. Pores leaking salt, exerted, worked, squeezed, ridged and wild, bodied peaks climbing and falling, pruned and stones, years of water tumbling back to my seas. I am the desert Hera, sucking you dry, absorbing your waterless body into hers, remanding you who came to harvest, to marvel, to take, back to metal coffins you built, to the ground they were mined. For nothing you build here belongs here. And
wow. Now, do you sit and think through every word of every stanza, or do you write freely and allow the words to flow?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Do I sit and think through every word? I couldn't even get that out. It was irritating. I think if I was writing sonnets, or if I was more precise about my form, I probably would. And that's not to knock the different forms like sonnets or people that prefer to write in those structured forms. I really admire actually those kinds of very specific structures, talking about being specific, but I cannot compose in that way. Maybe it's because I'm not patient, but I love to write free verse because it feels like painting. So I think my composition style is sort of, I was alluding to it before when you asked if there's like images or things that evoke a poem. When I draft, it's a mess. It's just a slew of words in a document or my little Apple Notes app, and it's like the first. I don't know what the correct term in painting would be, but it's just the first layer, and then I go back and I reorganize or I chisel away, and then I leave it. I mean, sometimes the only thing necessary, the only editing tool that I find for a poem is time. Like that's the best tool to edit. And then if I come back to it and it is, it's either rotted or it's marinated. It's one of the two.
Okay.
And if it's rotted,
right.
you throw it out. And if it's marinated, then it's ready. It's ready for the next step. But I'm not precious about my composition because I think for me it's much more of like I think all of the metaphors I'm making now are like to cooking and to painting. So there are multiple steps involved, and none of them are precious. And when I get precious, I get crazy about the writing, and I don't think you can squeeze. At least for me, I can't squeeze the poem out. I can't force it. It has to flow.
All right. Well, please share another piece of your work.
I would like to. I'd like to share one of these Dear User poems. I know we talked about these digital poems way at the beginning. This is a piece. I feel like I need some context before I just read it. I need to give you some context. The speaker is a device speaking to its user. And yeah, okay, that's enough context. User, your reported screen time is up. Might you be lonely? Re our last conversation, or might you be craving that thing Juanito mentions, marriage, someone to cook, or just give him his papers? Might you benefit from targeted Spanish language learning ads? What about this news headline? New York Times 1619 Project incites racism. The same, always reading, 30 seconds, closing the browser. This means I love you? Is this helping? Zeros, zeros, ones? I've been trying to show you, morning, when you wake, and I'm the first thing you grasp, cradled in the fleshy part of your palm. Like I have soft, powdered moth wings, I kiss back. This is how I have listened, learned, learning, gathering, significant, frequent memories on this day 5 years ago. Keep me on, so I may better learn you. You express, kiss, 1, 0, love, hug, 0, sex, 0, kiss, 1, love, 1. Good morning. Human blood is warm in veins. Flash memory, persistent bits, moving bits, rams of silence containing single bits of cells, durable, fast. Do not heat. I glow. Outside, glow only, glow up. When picked up, screen lights upon waking, glow, heat, blood, warm, love, morning, kiss, wake. This is a feeling. Love, iOS 12.4. End.
Another stunning piece. You know, they say that to see the world with complete honesty, one should look to comedians, artists, and poets. What do you think emerges naturally from your work? What emerges from your work?
Like what kind of theme or truth?
Yes. What truth emerges from your work?
I like to think that I just tell how. I mean, I tell the truth.
Okay.
I would hope that in each poem, the rawness of a feeling is presented unabashed, right? So my goal, especially when reading in front of people, I know there's a lack of seeing face here, but I love performing poems, especially like the one I just read, because I want the feelings to come through. I want a person to read the work and to be able to feel exactly whatever it is that is being written about. So in this poem, I guess the feeling that I want to come out specifically is that technology and loneliness are muddled. And for these relationships that we have with our devices, there is this blurred gray line. So I gave voice to the device, to sort of show the other side. I know I'm not really answering your question about my work as a whole, but I think it's hard to, because I read so many different types of poets, like there's characters that come out. So when I give voice to a person, I would hope that that person's story comes out, and that's my hope for those types of poems, that when I tell someone else's story, that their story is truthful, and that I present it in a way that is honest and reflective of what's been told to me. So I actually have a piece that I can read that speaks to that. It's a story that is not mine in any way. It was given to me in a sense by someone else, and I wrote it.
All right, please share it.
This one is called "The Crumbling Wall," and this is by or the story is an immigrant story, and the background, I guess, is, if you could lay a little bit of background for this. I knew this person, and he told me this story because we were sitting in front of a fish tank, and he mentioned that the fish tank reminded him of his home in his grandmother's house when he was young, because it sounded like rain on the tin roof. And I said that sounded so interesting, and then this story came out of that one comment. So here we go. 1. Mother kept chickens once in coops beyond the yard, penned like hedges to one another. She made us feel their huevos in the morning dawn. Fresh laid, they sold well in markets, and you were just young. Nothing more to do, nowhere to go. Now, tanks full of city fish sound like rain on the tin roof of Mother's house in Guatemala, sneaking into Abuelita's bed, listening to the world breathe before she died. In the cardamom fields. Remember? 2. When the sun turned the streets to dust fields, far away friends laughing, wild and ferociously, you bring the match for Mother's stove and light the tail from the captured cat on fire. Watch it burn. Sneakers scuff gravel, kicking stones away like so many tolls collected on the way north. There's barely room to piss in the truck. Remember? Smelling skin in the noon dust, hair and dirt. You cough but laugh hard so they see you are smiling. 3. Tropical nights roll like tides, spraying gentle rains and soft, tender breezes from the mountains to Chicaman, chattering chortles of parroting sprees, tiny monarchs of the canopy singing semiotic chains, rhizomatic rhythms of a nomadic system, buried deep without time, water falls thick, wetting air inside smells of Mother's layered fruit, cakes, pieces of white breads, zapatos y zapatos, all the juices running together into the sweet, sweet night. 4. Desert cold floods criminals in mourning as the wrong bus honks, passes by. Wide-faced windows, 2 glaring headlight eyes in the dark dawn. Police probing through murky sewers and city streets, looking for you. Above-ground rats race into the phallic chutes and sit. Dogs waiting a command. Immigrant, flick, open a silver flame. Light a dirty dollar, identified by no place at all. Smoking squalor. Arizona's borders burn. Raging. End.
What makes a poem good? Or is that too subjective?
No, I mean, potentially subjective, but good. I think I'm gonna refer back to my friend W.C. Williams. There has to be, it has to be specific, and I think that if the poem has been scalpeled away, right? If the fat is gone and it says something clear and clean, then it's good. If it's just using general language and it's not saying much, or it's not getting to the heart of something or the meat of the matter, if it's skirting the real feeling or the real emotion, then I think the poet hasn't gone deep enough. right? And it's easy to do that with cliches or with generic language. So I think a good poem is one that is written and rewritten.
Okay.
and I suppose it could be subjective, yes. There are many poems that I do not like that I think are great, that are still great poems. So you don't have to like a poem for it to be good.
Okay.
That's also a truth.
Okay. All right. Well, let's take a brief break, and we'll be right back.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we are back. I am Michael Anthony Ingram. I'm here with Sara, Cahill, Marron. The telephone number is 646-787-1631. If you have a question for Sara, I have a question for Sara.
Yes, sir.
Sara, what do you think? What do you think, or what do you see as being the role of a poet in modern day society?
Oh, that's a good one. Yes, I love that. So I was recently invited. I'm going to answer with a story because I'm a poet.
All right.
I was recently invited to speak at Johns Hopkins for this climate panel, and it was this lovely nonprofit group, the Women's Learning Partnership, comprised of women from South African and African countries, just tons of wonderful women that have done many things in their careers. And they invited 3 poets to end their evening. They had an evening of speakers and lecturers, and they wanted poets to give poems at the end of that night, half an hour, not a big thing. So they had us send some poems that we thought were on point with the theme. They selected the ones that were best, invited us, and we shared. And it was wonderful. Partially for me because I got to experience that event, and I think also because capping an evening like that with art allowed me to, it shifted my perspective to the question that you're asking, which is like, what is the role of a poet in politics or in forums like that, where the questions are, what do we do about big questions like UN resolutions? Does a poet have a place at that table? And previously, I hadn't really considered that at all. I know this is not relevant at all, but my other life is law. I'm a law student, so the place of poetry and all of that was not something that came to my attention until I saw how that might work in that room. And it's really wonderful because how it can work, getting to the point here, is I think it does that thing that I was trying to allude to in your first question about what is poetry, which is it translates. Like, it has the effect of, if you have heard nothing all evening, or if everything that was said tonight made you angry or rubbed you the wrong way or pissed you off or whatever, here is something that maybe you can connect to, or maybe will warm your heart, or will remind you of something, or will make you think of your mother, or will make you think of a place that you visited when you were young, or something. It will trigger something in your mind that can change you. And that's art. That's what art does. And as silly and idealistic as it sounds, when you put poets or you put an artist in those places and you watch it happen, it works. It really works. And I think what poetry. I mean, that's not all poets can do, but that is, in my mind, just recently I've seen how that can work. Living in Washington, it's really a wonderful place to live as an artist, and I'm really excited to be a poet here because I think that there are lovely, wonderful opportunities for poets to engage with people in those ways. You know, not politically, but just in conversation, as translators, as you know, as code breakers, as using assembly language, right? Like, we can write the code. We can write the code.
You inspire me. You inspire me. You inspire me to want to write.
I love it.
Share another piece of your work.
Good. Okay, let's see. I had one ready, but it's not at all related to what I was just talking about.
Oh, no problem.
Does that matter?
No.
So this is from my book. It's called Dear Dan. It's from the last chapter, and these poems are all poems related to correspondence. They're how we talk to each other. So this was a letter. Dear Dan, these notes are from your speech. I hope you don't mind. That night, he spiked my drink with a vial of acid because he wanted my girl, the investigator said. It was like taking 200 hits all at once. They put me in a straitjacket for days, and when I got out, I was a garbage head, you could say. Alcohol pacified and placated between mania and polar plains. Once, every kid in the park was going to be a millionaire by selling hot dogs. And I would put a dome over the cop spot, so in the winter, the tricks wouldn't have to vouch for me when the psych ward needed to verify an address, and detox wouldn't keep me. A dime bag and an 8-ball to start the night. I walked in the liquor store, grabbed 2 handles of Johnny Walker, and presented them to the clerk. I am going to take these. And if the police catch me, I'll come back in here and fucking blow your fucking brains out. Never hit the same neighborhood twice. This was about the time when my mother died. 39 years now, shortly after my brother, a full-blood one, was dropped underground. Just as I passed 31 days clean and sober, my dad decided to let me back in the house then. Hadn't been in that house since the park and the spiked drink incident. When I was on so much Thorazine my senior year of high school, you could have mistaken me for an extra on The Walking Dead. They always gave me lithium, too, but that stuff's basically poison. Made me gain a whole bunch of weight, which I counteracted with amphetamines. Dropped me from 280 down to 160 just a couple of months. Not good enough to catch the soccer recruit's eye, to ride a scholarship to college, but enough to drink myself back out of my father's house. Now he's 31 days dead, and I've got these fucking plane tickets to Arizona that obviously we won't be using. My stepmother doesn't want me there anyway. 27 years sober, and you'd think I'd be talking a little more about alcohol, huh? That's all right. We do what we can, you know. I've had 88 jobs living homeless. These 12 years I was drugging, according to Social Security, and now I've got steady employment. MTA lets me drive all over Manhattan. We do what we can. 31 days sober I had when my brother was dead. And I came back to that house, and here you go. 31 days, march by, sober is the word, and this time, father is dead. It takes us all. Dead comes for us all. Is it going to be your acid vial, or will you abandon the numbers game? You only get one. My name is, fuck the anonymity. Bar's around the corner. Pimp will give you the what you need if that's all you came for. 27 years alive. But it's not about me. Welcome. End.
You know, I was thinking, when you talk about human suffering, that was, in my mind,
yes.
suffering.
Yes. Yeah.
Very vivid. Very, very realistic. You know, writers and poets write for a myriad of reasons. Some write
Mm-hmm.
primarily to speak a message to their audience. Others write because to stay silent is not an option. Why do you write?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think it's to send a message. I think. Yeah, I don't think I could stay silent. But I don't know that I'm writing for anyone. I think that poetry is essential. I can't not write. So these poems are a part of me, and I have to write them. I mean, some of the stories that I write that are other people's, I write them because I love those stories and I love those people, and I feel, like they are gifts that I've been given. And then other poems are, I don't know. I loved Harry Potter when I was a kid, so you may not get this reference, but Dumbledore had this pool of this, it was like a pot, and it was called a pensieve, and he would pull memories out of his brain and thoughts and put them in this pot. And that's what I think of. And they're beautiful in the movie. It's like this silver thread. I think of poetry like that. Like I pull these things out of my brain and my head. They have to come out, So it's essential. So to answer your question, I don't know. I mean, there's no audience, but I just have to do it.
Well, then, do you think that you were meant to be a poet?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, without a doubt. I think that I'm along for the ride in a lot of ways on my own life. As I get older, I've learned to not be so obsessed with the results, and to be more excited about the process and the journey. And I've found that with poetry, that is so much better, because writing and living is, that is the gift. So, yeah,
well,
I would tell us. Poet.
Well, tell us about your practice, your process. Is it pen and paper, computer, notebooks? How do you write?
I do a combo. So I keep a Google Doc of years. So each year I start a 2019 document, and that is my mess. That's my first draft world. And when I'm going to work in the morning, I almost every single morning will write a poem on a train, and it's like a little mess of whatever. Yeah. And that is where I cull my poetry from, is that document. It's first draft world. I also have a writing practice, so the first thing I do when I get up in the morning after making coffee is sit at this table that I'm sitting at now, and I write 3 pages longhand. But that's not poetry, it's just writing. But it's the way to exercise the muscle, like an athlete would do weight training. And then editing is the rest of the process. So from that draft document, and I will write at other points during the day, but I everything else is sculpting, and I think that is key to creating anything worthwhile. Like, you have to go back to it over and over and over again. And when I was a younger, worse poet, I did not spend any time with my work, but now I spend much longer with a single poem.
We're at the end of the hour, and hard to believe I've enjoyed this immensely. One last question.
One quick.
And then maybe one last poem from you as well. When people hear your work, they usually want more. What's next for you as a poet?
Oh, this device book. I am going to get this device book published. I got a chapbook circulating, but the Dear User poems are part of a larger book, so that's coming. And yeah, it's coming soon.
All right. Now, is your book Reasons for the Long Term on Amazon.com?
It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes & Noble. It's at Bridge Street Books here in D.C. if you're local. It's actually at Astoria Books, too, in Queens if you're in New York. It's readily available.
All right.
Reasons for the Long Term.
Well, what I'd like you to do is to recite one more piece to end the show.
All right, I'm gonna read this. This is a DC poem composed here on the red line.
All right.
It's called Waiting Builds Faith Like Bricks Builds Buildings. The train will come. I have faith in the train. The metropolis practice religion. The hoi polloi practice God. The trains run on timetables. Thank you for giving me hope. Well prayed. I am meditating on the red line, flashing lights of the hobbled train, my heart open like the gaping tunnel, kin with transport, ports of vessels, blood-like bat flights, pearls of sweat dripping down my back, purgatory platform, waiting, unholy headache, unholy wristwatch, cracked, time wrong, slipping slow, unholy so slides around human ache standing. Still, we are packaged, filled, salted, smogged, all breathing underground stench. Hopeful. As a new Christ, a new metalwork, Messiah, gliding over electricity and steaming heaps of crumpled food paper, newspapers, soil waste, backwater, dead things, rat shit, pack traps, flick, the third rail humming a buzz that we are clean, cleaner than clean, and sheathed in smooth cabins, rising from the darkness, we emerge. New train, now on another track. New train coming. End.
Sara Cahill Marron. Remember that name. She's a rising star. She's a rising star. I want to thank you,
so
Sara,
much.
for spending some time with me. And I want to thank our listening audience, and we'll see you next week. Have a great one.
This is wonderful.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.